Welcome to UN Behavioral Science Week 2025. This is the session of today's topic. We'll cover behavioral science and data and AI. So as mentioned, my name is Mary. I'm a behavioral scientist and I lead a number of initiatives here in the UN Behavioral Science groups. Okay, so we unfortunately started our webinar a little bit too early, but glad everyone's here. So today's session, what we'll cover is we will first start with a few remarks from some colleagues both within and outside the UN to situate ourselves in this topic of behavioral science, data and AI, and what it means to the UN context. And then we'll go over to a panel discussion, but more practical examples of how we can explore these topics and ideas and how they come together overall. So with that, first, we're going to turn it over to remarks from USG Gill. So USG Amandeep Gill is the one second here. He's the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. He's leading the UN efforts when it comes to digital cooperation, tech, and governance. He was previously the co-lead of the UN Secretariat of the UN High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation. And he was previously as well India's ambassador to the Conference on Disarmament. He's a diverse background spanning diplomacy, international security, as well as emerging technologies. And he has a focus on inclusive and responsible tech in the work that he does overall. So with that, we'll turn it over to USG Gill and his remarks.
Dear colleagues, this 2025 UN Behavioral Science Week comes at a time when the UN system must demonstrate that it can work efficiently and effectively and communicate this as well. The quintet of change alongside AI, analytics, and behavioral science can help us meet this challenge. Artificial intelligence is already proving its value in humanitarian and development efforts. For example, AI can improve flood forecasting, producing more accurate predictions up to 7 days in advance, even in regions with limited data infrastructure. That means better preparedness, faster response, and ultimately more lives saved. We are seeing similar applications across early warning systems, disaster response, and service delivery, offering new lifelines to vulnerable populations. As governments pursue digital transformation, behavioral science is essential. By understanding real-world behaviors, it can help identify barriers to digital adoption, improve uptake of services, and make digital systems more inclusive, effective, and human-centered. This is especially important in the context of AI, where public trust, accessibility, and ethical design are key. AI, especially generative AI, has the potential to augment capacity and free up time for higher value work. It can support report drafting, document summarization, grant writing, and multilingual communication. Tools like coding assistants and natural language interfaces can also make digital platforms more user-friendly across the system. But we must also guard against risks: misinformation, discrimination, and inequality. AI must not reinforce harmful patterns or leave people behind. We must consider the wider societal effects of AI. As it becomes more personal and pervasive, we risk growing social isolation, mental health challenges, and weakened human connection, particularly for youth. Disinformation, deepfakes, and synthetic content also threaten democratic processes and public trust. To respond well, we need global coordination, common standards, and preventive measures like media literacy and fact-checking to build resilience. The UN has a critical role in shaping ethical, transparent, and inclusive governance of AI. Generative AI should assist, not replace, human decision-making. The Independent International Scientific Panel on AI and the Global Dialogue on AI Governance will help ensure that this technology serves humanity, not the other way around. We must also encourage voluntary commitments from all stakeholders, strengthen AI capacity building, and work together to put a floor under the AI divide. Behavioral science, AI, and data are not just technical tools. They are strategic drivers of transformation. They are central to achieving the Secretary General's vision of a UN 2.0, a more agile, forward-looking, and impactful UN. As we celebrate innovation and progress across the system this week, let's recommit to using these tools responsibly, ethically, and inclusively. I look forward to the ideas and collaborations that will emerge and to continuing this journey with all of you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for those remarks to really set the scene again from a good big picture level in terms of where we're going in the UN from the more digital side. Okay, so with that, I'm seeing lots of likes and hearts in the Zoom here. So people are seeming to like the remarks from you as you go. So next, let's go over to Ayaka Suzuki, who's a familiar face in Behavioral Science Weeks. She's been with us for a number of years now. She's the director of the Strategic Planning and Monitoring Unit in the Executive Office of the Secretary General. She also has previously held positions as the Chief of Staff in the Department of Peacekeeping Operations and Field Support. She has a varied career spanning roles in field settings such as Libya and Haiti. So she brings to us not only experience working in the Secretary General's office, but also really on the ground practical applications of the work that we're discussing today. So with that, over to you, Ayaka, for your remarks.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me back. It's always a great pleasure to kick off the Behavioral Science Week with all of you. So I was asked several questions to kind of frame my discussion, starting with why the UN needs UN 2.0 today. So I wanted to start by saying that UN 2.0 agenda is about giving UN organization a 21st century upgrade. And I think we'll agree that we desperately need that. Let's think of the UN as a time-tested vessel built for navigating the complex waters of global peace, human development, and dignity. But the seas have changed, and we feel the turbulence, even though now I'm kind of mixing the comparisons here. UN 2.0 is the upgrade we need now. New engines, sharper navigation tools, a smarter crew, so that we can move with greater speed, force, and agility. It's a system-wide effort to embed 5 new core capabilities in all UN organizations, and many of you are in the midst of that. So just as a reminder, what we're talking about are data, digital, foresight, innovation, and behavioral science. And that's what the focus of the week is today, this week. But ultimately, UN 2.0 isn't just about internal upgrades. It's about transforming how we serve 193 member states and hundreds of millions of people worldwide. And increasingly, that means understanding how humans interact with AI systems and how to design these systems in ways that are ethical, equitable, and grounded in evidence. So UN teams are piloting behaviorally informed AI tools in the humanitarian response and development, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about these use cases and your experiences later this week. These examples, they include personalized nudges, surfacing facts, and optimizing outreach, so we can do a better job for all. So I'm just going to list some examples. We know that WFP's Share the Meal app, for example, that has helped mobilize resources for over 200 million meals in the past 3 years for vulnerable people based on better outreach and engagement. DESA, for example, is working with a technology partner so that UN's global statistics help AI chatbots retrieve answers grounded in fact, not misinformation. Behavioral scientists in WHO, another example, help public health teams design explainable AI that people can trust based on new AI principles developed together with leading scientists. So what's next for UN 2.0? Our focus now is on mainstreaming and scaling, making sure these capabilities are no longer innovations, in inverted commas, but part of how the UN operates every day. There's a big push for talent, colleagues who understand both behavior and algorithm. To that end, UN organizations have created entirely new job profiles And you can now be an AI engineer at the UN. Our UN 2.0 LinkedIn pages has featured over 1,200 such jobs in the past year alone. So please make sure to follow the UN 2.0 LinkedIn page if you have not done so already. There's also big strategy rethink. Over 40 UN organizations are currently designing new corporate strategies that shape over $40 billion in annual assistance. All of them have committed to put data, digital, AI, BSci, and foresight work front and center. And we're building new partnerships with academia, labs, and the private sector to create AI solutions that are smart and value-driven. Leading thinkers like Yasha Banjo and Faith Lee, for example, are supporting our Secretary General and his leadership team directly on this through the Scientific Advisory Board. And finally, we're working with member states to inform the future of AI itself from a multilateral, human-centered perspective based on the General Assembly's Pact for the Future. So UN 2.0 is more than an internal reform initiative. It is a shift towards a UN system with 21st solutions. And I'm sure some of you have heard about UN 80. And Secretary General has said and over again that the UN 80 is a natural extension of UN 2.0. And again, it's really ultimately about making sure that the UN is fit for purpose. So with that, I turn over back to Mary. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for those remarks, Ayaka, to set us up with the situation of how things are in the Secretary General's office and the bigger picture conversation that's taking place. So thank you for that. Well, next we'll head over to Professor Sandy Pentland, who's professor at the MIT Media Lab. He's also a leading expert when it comes to computational social science. He's carried out pioneering work on the research basically when it comes to AI, big data, as well as human behavior. He's advised numerous governments, international organizations, as well as major tech firms about data-driven decision-making. So he's well placed to be with us today to set the scene in terms of what behavioral science is, what data science is, and kind of what does that mean for the work of the UN overall. So Sandy, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So very honored to be here. And what I want to talk about is a little bit of the journey about how we got here and where we're going to go next. You know, as probably all of you are familiar, in this millennium, turn of this millennium, we began the Millennium Development Goals. And also we saw the datafication of everything. Data about everything suddenly became available as everything moved to the internet, moved to cell phones. And as a consequence, social science moved there too. Policy moved there too. A more computational big data approach to how do we understand things? How do we set up policies? How do we know if our policies are working? And this got a particular sort of extra push when the Sustainable Development Goals were being put together. The Secretary General was very struck by the fact that things that weren't being measured weren't being done, which we all know is the way of the world. And so what he wanted to do was have data be a central element of the Sustainable Development Goals. And he put together a team of data revolutionaries, which I was proud to be one of, who were supposed to set measurements and goals and things like that for the data side. But of course, progress is slow because this has to run through official bodies of each of the governments. And it wasn't so obviously in the political interest of everybody to do these sorts of things, but some countries have. And with the advent of AI, there's been a lot more emphasis on data and being able to use AI sorts of methods to be able to monitor things. And this has come together with the ability for countries to be able to set policies and monitor the policies pretty much in real time and alter them with a science-based approach. And I think that's what I would hope for the UN. And so I personally work with several countries who are making real progress and real investment in this. And I think that's an exciting thing, is to finally have policies that we know work and can watch work, and we can share with the population to be able to demonstrate that they work. I would like to actually end by sharing one thing that I'm would like people to just sort of keep in the back of their minds, or perhaps in the front, and that is that all of this sort of data work comes together in a very human sort of way. The single most powerful factor we've seen in many things, income growth, intergenerational mobility, crime, has to do with how neighborhoods are connected to the rest of society. Very simple things like isolated neighborhoods simply don't do well. The kids don't do well. Crime thrives. Neighborhoods that are connected through where people work, where people visit, where people shop, tend to do much better. And some countries are beginning to design their infrastructure around this principle. So not just making the highways faster or the buildings taller, but actually trying to have that sort of access to opportunity, access to diverse experiences for everyone, not because it's a nice to have, but because it's the core of the social contract between government and citizens, is to build a better world. And I think that's a possible thing now with UN 2.0. I would love to see these sorts of insights be the driving element of it. And I'll just stop there and turn it back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you for those remarks to set us up with kind of the bigger picture and how things are from your side as well. So thank you so much for that. Okay, if you would like to stick around, we'll have maybe a bit of time for discussion closer to the end of today's session. So we'll hear now from Kamal Kishore, who's the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction. His experience obviously is in disaster risk reduction, but also resilience building, climate adaptation. He's previously held roles such as being the head of the Department of National Disaster Management and Authority of India, and over a decade at UNDP. He works with governments and international organizations to implement evidence-based disaster policies and programming. So over to you, Kamal, for your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary, for this opportunity. I think it's great that I have this chance to interact with colleagues at the UN Behavioral Science Week. I think the work that the UN Behavioral Science Group is doing has huge implications for my area of work. So my office, UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, our main responsibility is to work with member states in implementing the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and reduce losses from all kinds of disasters. And at the outset, I want to say that disaster risk reduction is all about transforming, modifying human behavior. Back in the 90s, there was something called International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction. And over that decade, we realized that there is nothing natural about so-called natural disasters. Earthquakes occur, cyclones occur, flood occurs, tsunamis occur. But these phenomena, these natural phenomena, turn into disasters only when they interact with human behavior, such as people building poorly constructed buildings in poorly designed buildings in earthquake-prone areas, being too close to the coast in coastal areas, not taking into account how to make their houses stronger to withstand strong winds. So I think it's all about basically disaster risk reduction is a social economic construction which is underpinned by behavior of human beings at a large scale, while the governments and other institutions try to codify behavior. There are codes and bylaws. Just as we speak, there are millions of behaviors, millions of actions being taken by human beings across the world, which is actually contributing to the buildup of disaster risk. So recognizing behavioral science as a centerpiece of our work, back in 2022, our global assessment report began to talk about it. So this is an area of work. I can't say that we've cracked it. We've recognized that this is the piece we need to work more on. So I want to leave this panel with three ideas or three questions. I can't say that we have answers to those. The first is we really have to ask this question, that is information and evidence on disaster risk enough? I just returned from the Pacific, where, in Kiribati and Vanuatu and Samoa, when you speak with the Met Agency, they say that, well, we've produce this excellent drought forecast for the season, but people continue to act as if nothing is going to change. So what is it that we need to do? Is there some translational research required to turn this whole area of work, to turn information and evidence to something which actually nudges behavior? The second question I want to ask is that in the 21st century, with the promise of technology, emerging technologies, AI, space-based technologies, and so on, can we begin to understand behavior of large populations, many different groups at scale, and understand, what is happening to our groundwater, for instance? Where is it being extracted too much? In the aftermath of a disaster, can we pick signals on how people's behavior has changed? And as a result, how can we analyze that and use that to inform our response? We just had an earthquake in Myanmar 3 weeks ago. Can we apply technologies to have a very quick assessment of, how is it that affected people are responding to the earthquakes, where the signals of distress are, and how we can actually work with them? So I think, how can we understand, analyze behavior at scale, and really come up with response systems that are in sync with that? And my final point is that we really have to see how we change institutional behavior. Institutions that are responsible for large investments sometimes appear to be completely risk blind. There is a little bit of short-termism. The way we look at risk is not, holistic. It's very short-term. For example, if you build an infrastructure, you have to look at not just the cost that you incur while building it, but also maintaining it over its entire life cycle, and see if it is being impacted by, different kinds of hazards, and you have to repair it and refurbish it. That too is the cost. So how do we sort of modify institutional investment behavior? So that's the third question I would leave with. I think this is really an exciting area of work. I think if we bring behavioral science to the core of disaster risk reduction efforts in 5 years, I hope we can show a lot of progress on the implementation of Sendai framework. Thank you very much, Mary. Back to you.
Great, thank you for those remarks. Lots of overarching pieces when it comes to behavioral science, from current decision-making, future decision-making, all the different ways in which data and behavioral science can come together. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so now on to our panel discussion. So if colleagues who are on our panel would like to turn their cameras on as I introduce yourselves. So first we'll hear from Juan Lavista Ferres, who's the Director of AI for Good Lab at Microsoft. His work really looks at applying AI and data science to global challenges, particularly with UN agencies and NGOs, which is very relevant to our work. And his experience also has included working with the Inter-American Development Bank. So lots of interesting, relevant experience there. We'll also hear from Adriana Legovini, who's the Director of the Development Impact Department, also known as DIME in the World Bank. Here she has, within her part of the bank, there's a behavioral science initiative, which she will speak to, but also has a focus on evidence and evaluation and thinking about using data in novel ways. So she'll also unpack that a bit more broadly. And then finally, we'll hear from Mireia Villar Forner, who's the UN resident coordinator in Colombia, where she drives efforts in Colombia to integrate innovation and sustainable development. So out of all the RC resident coordinators, Colombia is well known as a space for innovation. UN 2.0 is progressing, so great to have her with us. And she's spanned a variety of roles over the years, including most recently as the resident representative to Uruguay. So with this, my first question is over to Juan. So as the head of AI for Good Lab at Microsoft, you work closely with partners like the UN. From your perspective, how can AI and behavioral science come together to enhance the impact of this work? And what opportunities and perhaps responsibilities do tech actors have in supporting the evidence-based and human-centered solutions at scale that we're talking about? So over to you.
Thanks, Mary. So as part of our AI for Good Lab, we work with organizations around the world who use AI to help them with their job, basically. And this is something that we work with organizations like the Initiative of Early Learning for All in the UN, to organizations like hospitals and research institutions. At the end, our objective is to have an impact. And the AI and data can do so far. You need for people to make decisions on data. You need for people to use the data to act. And that's where behavioral science plays a fundamental role in the work we do. The more we can collaborate and work together, the more chances we have to have a greater impact. So that's basically why I do think it's critical for this to collaborate and to work together on some of these problems. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for those remarks there about how, yeah, that's great. So we can maybe put in the chat some of the AI for Good Lab resources to understand more about what you do as well. Second question over to Adriana. So within your work, from your perspective, how can the integration of behavioral science and AI most effectively enhance development impact, specifically when it comes to contexts where data might be limited or where particularly human-centered design would be essential? Over to you.
Mary, thank you very much for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. So at Dime, we have been working for the last 20 years to inject what I call a childlike curiosity for scientific discovery. The idea is that with science, we can improve the impact of our programs and test the different ideas and figure out what works contextually. And so, of course, as part of this journey, we have developed a lot of evidence on how to get policies to work better, but especially to get people excited around the idea that we don't know it all. Environments are complex, and it is not sufficient to intervene. We also need to work with people, not only to educate and inform, but allow them the opportunity to make better choices for themselves. And so this is where our mind, behavior, and development team comes into place, where we work interactively between our policies and the behavior that is needed to make those policies stick and function. And in this journey, we are not only integrating behavioral insights as part of everything that we do, but also we have added this layer of AI, which has been really transformational in taking us from generating the evidence of how to make things work and having tools to actually scale up that evidence at global scale. I can't tell you the level of excitement that we are experiencing today with our research teams, which are multi-layered and multidisciplinary today, comprising economists and behavioral scientists and LLM specialists to move the world to a different level. And I don't know if you want me to give you some examples right now, but the way we think of it is in a very integrated fashion, where we think about, evidence from randomized controlled trials leading the way of our thinking, and then developing a tool, in local low resource environments to understand those environments and scale up that evidence, and layering behavioral insights to give us a much better set of tools to actually implement change and progress together in the right direction. Would you like me to go into some examples, or?
Sure, if you would like to.
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah, let me give you the first example that comes to mind is something that we are working on with Google.org, which is something called Zero Hunger AI. This is a predictive AI tool to improve the precision of where the crisis will hit up to 12 months in advance by layering news media into the more traditional tools for predicting hunger. And here we also use RCT evidence that shows that providing transfers to people in advance of crisis is much more effective than doing it just after. And so here is an opportunity to scale up the preventative measures into the crisis. But now we face other issues, meaning providing people with resources is not sufficient. People also need the information to act in a way that protects their own livelihoods. And so, for example, in Haiti, our behavioral team shows that the messages that were sent to people for evacuations were actually not effective. People did not understand the messages or if they understood the messages, they downplayed the risk. And if they understood the risk, they didn't trust the messengers or the relief options that they had in their hands. And so the team worked to kind of transform these messages into visual clues that would allow people to actually act on the information and make better choices for themselves. And other examples come from violence and dealing with violence and online safety. So one of the issues that we face is, and that we can show, is that online safety is correlated and even causally related to violence on the ground. And this is really concerning because there might be one person initiating hate messaging and then other people mindlessly clicking and reposting. And we see this escalation of violence online. And then we identify actual outbursts of violence on the ground. And so we've worked in the case of Nigeria to develop LLMs, something called Niger, to understand the local language and identify hate speech online. And by doing so, we were actually able to develop a behavioral intervention with local influencers and positive messaging throughout the network of people who generate hate speech and also the people who disseminate that hate speech, finding that we can actually induce better behavior and better choices from people who may be reposting negative messaging, and conducted NRCTs that showed that we can reduce that hate speech presence online by as much as 20%, which is not 100%, but it's twice as much as the platform are actually able to manage. And so having a real impact on, we think, on violence on the ground. So again, combining the trials with the behavioral insights, with AI tools, we can actually scale up something like this at a national level. And hopefully, with the help of others who are interested in doing this work, and kind of create a collaborative and replicate this work all over the world. And my final, if I may, my final example comes from the area of gender norms. And we're working with the Gates Foundation on something pretty transformational, which is to use AI to track and analyze social norms across all entertainment media in 3 settings for now: India, Nigeria, and Kenya. So this is fairly unheard of because basically we're starting to have high frequency data at a huge scale, scanning across all types of media, social, entertainment media, even radio and SMS logs and news on what norms are being projected in our media. And we're using behavioral insights to understand and analyze what this means for the affected populations. Not only that, but we're combining that with RCT evidence that shows that we can actually implement entertainment media that affects people's choices in better directions that are more productive, not only for their own families and households, like sending girls to school and having, better options and better attitude towards women and their jobs opportunity and economic opportunities, and that we can translate that evidence into something that we want to inject at greater scale in our social and entertainment media. So again, kind of combining the power of AI to have, in this case, data at scale and what is actually going on with behavioral insights to understand the meaning of that, with evidence that shows that we can transform that system of norms and behavior in the right direction for, again, people making better choices for their family, their economic advancement, and even very simple things like, oh, simple, not so simple, but perhaps, things like sexual behaviors that improves their health and their ability and fights against mortality and other ailments. So ultimately, combining AI, behavioral science, and experimental approaches gives us a very good toolkit to design, test, and scale interventions, not only at a very small scale as we might have done before, but actually enlarging that scale and reaching whole countries and even the whole globe. So with that, I'd say, this is super exciting period of our history. And we all know the dangers or the potential dangers of AI. I'm not trying to dismiss those, but by getting involved and using AI in a way that is actually conducive towards the public good and supporting our targets, I think we can shift that path towards progress.
Great, thank you for that, Ariana. There's so much there to unpack in terms of the potential of where we could take both behavioral science and the AI work forward. So thank you for that. And I'll put in the chat again the link to the Embed website. I think colleagues might be interested in hearing more about the projects. I know there's lots of case studies there. Okay, so with that, now over to Mireia. For you in your role as the resident coordinator in Colombia, we talked about UN 2.0 and the importance of this quintet, looking at behavioral science, data, digital, innovation, foresight. In terms of your work, what's the most needed to successfully apply these areas regarding capacity, coordination, institutional support? How do you see these issues from your standpoint?
Great, and thank you, Mary, for also bringing the voice of the resident coordinators to this conversation. I think we're all humbled about what's happening, but excited at the same time. And look, I think that if there is a place in the UN where we've been trying to push culture change for impact, I think these are the country teams in the 130 countries where we serve. The reform of the development system was precisely trying to make us fit to help deliver the 2030 agenda. But as others have mentioned, at this juncture, so much more is at stake for our organization and for the norm-based system that we created. And it's after all in the countries that we serve where we are closest to those whose trust I think we're trying to regain at this moment. And it is there where our relevance, or lack of it in some cases, is most immediately felt. And it's in those markets, and in those societies where we need to see and accompany the biggest transformations. And clearly, it's with those governments, our member states, that we need to reimagine the way we collaborate. But so much of these initial years of the development reform, I am afraid, were spent very much inward looking. I think I would put that we're still excessively focused on managing large portfolios, on providing services, even in certain settings, in organizing events, big events, mind you, but still events. And instead, in the way I see my RC role, and mind you, I'm also an HC, humanitarian coordinator, is to bring our value proposition precisely to that world out there, the world that we seek to influence, a world with people, with finance, with ideas. And so I see my leadership and the leadership of the resident coordinators as one that should produce change, should leverage relationships and resources, and should generate an influence at scale. So me and the country teams, the agencies, funds, and programs that we share the space in the country should be able to reconnect the organization with these people that we're serving. And we should be a lot more proactive about influencing public opinion, decision makers, and why not the market around those issues that are really dear to us. And we should be able to understand the trends and the information that impact our work, but also to help us see it coming much earlier. We should be able and feel comfortable joining private-public ecosystems. These are the people that are shaping the key SDG transitions in our settings, and we should be able to work much closer to those producing scientific evidence and help governments model a world that adopts this evidence. But yet, both RCs and UNCTs, we need access. We need access to industry leaders that are operating in these spaces. We need to master these tools and these technologies, including AI. We need to understand much better behavioral science and be able to access and analyze data and information from the outside the UN. We're very good at looking at our own data, but what about what's being produced out there? How do we look at it in a whole new way? And I think if we are equipped with that, we will be able not only to amplify the voice and the interests of those most left behind, but also the voice of the Secretary General, and by doing so, that of our membership at large. So I really, and I'm not, exaggerating, I cannot see a more central agenda to us today than the UN 2.0. And we should be help shaping it too with you. We could be early adopters of the quintet of change. In a place like Colombia, this is a complex setting. We have peace, we have humanitarian work, we have development, but I've been saying that we need to help rebuild precisely the development offer of the system. And that means embarking and pushing a change process that for our country teams goes well beyond what we call the configuration exercise. This is something that we do when we're preparing our cooperation framework. We assess whether we have the right mix of people and skills. And I would say that these reconfigurations need to be turbocharged with the UN 2.0, the 5, so that instead of looking at subject matter knowledge, capabilities, or even operational capacity, we are measuring whether we are able to interact with a world that is digital. We can use data and behavioral science. We can develop futures and prototype solutions. These are the skill sets and capabilities that we need. And maybe my last point, because looking at some of the guidance that has been produced, we're saying UN entities will chart their own way towards UN 2.0, and eventually their efforts will trickle down to their offices in the field. I would like to offer that as that happens, and as agencies get better and better equipped with these capabilities, we also use, from a bottom-up logic, the offices of the resident coordinators, because they can also mobilize that support with, obviously, a lot of backing from yourselves and the CEO. But we are a very interesting platform to showcase that these transformations are indeed already taking hold. So I just wanted to offer you that space as resident coordinators, as resident coordinator offices, to accelerate and consolidate the efforts that agencies are doing bilaterally.
Great, thank you for that overall. I think it's a nice segue to some of the conversations I think we'll be having later this week. On Friday, we're having one on from going global to local when it comes to behavioral science, and we're engaging with a lot of the local country offices in that area. It's not just this big agendas of UN 2.0. It's great to talk about it, Secretary General's office, but then what does it mean on the ground and the realities of the examples of what we've heard already today and where we could go with it as well. So that's on Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern, but I encourage you to check it out. Okay, so now we have some time for some discussion. So Kamal, if you're still there and you'd like to join us, you're welcome to join us. So I think there are lots of ways we could probe into this, but I might pull on a thread that Ayaka actually mentioned during her remarks about this UN 80 agenda. So I don't know if you've come across it. Basically, there's lots of conversations in the UN now about being efficient and effective and using evidence to make decisions. So, thinking about the topics we've already discussed today, behavioral science, AI, data, how can we leverage them to be more effective and really to inform decision-making and to create that case for not just doing what we do well, but doing it more efficiently and effectively? And what might you say in terms of that response as well? Not just, this is helpful and useful and adds value, but how does it help us work more efficiently as well? So I turn it over to you. Any thoughts or reflections on that to start? Maybe over to Adriana. I saw you nodding a little bit there. I could see you had something you wanted to share.
Well, actually, we're thinking of where we are using AI in multiple different ways. The first is to overlay all of our data and research workflows. So we are completely transforming our data and research workflows to include different ways of doing things. For example, automated anomaly detection in data that allows us to understand whether, what are the quality issues with data, or synthetic data that allows us to recreate data sets in a way that they can be shared because they don't have the same privacy issues as the original data sets. So these are, or in the research, kind of thinking, and we build infrastructure, end-to-end research to improve, bring in AI in all processes of the research, and AI agents to support the process of task management and analysis. The idea being that we can really increase the speed. So the amount of data that is available, of course, has increased in huge ways. The need for integrating data of different types, and the difficulties of doing so manually is obviously large. And so kind of getting support from AI, different AI processes and AI agents to do this better and faster provides huge opportunity for both efficiency, but also providing just-in-time answers. You imagine your boss asking you, what do we know about this? And kind of getting very, having the infrastructure, the data infrastructure and analytical infrastructure to actually get answers is pretty amazing. We've also been investing in evidence synthesis through something called Impact AI. You're going to hear more about it later in the week. But basically, the idea is to provide at your fingertips just-in-time evidence synthesis, living evidence synthesis, by investing in, a tool that mimics the process of doing systematic reviews, but it does it at the stamp of a finger. And in general, we on this idea, and third, I should say, this idea of localizing LLMs. So for example, Colombia was mentioned by Mireia. So we are working with a local partner that has implemented some interesting ideas on how to disseminate information and train health workers across the system. And now we're working with them to bring in AI tools to provide feedback to health workers on their diagnosis and treatment plans that, given the results in the literature in the US and more high resource environments, we believe can be absolutely transformative of the ability of that system to lower error in diagnosis and treatment plans and improve generally the ability of that system to deliver better health. So these are the type of things, and this is just one example, but there are many more of how you can improve the system-wide efficiency and effectiveness, both in our own ways of doing things at the World Bank and the UN, as well as in our partner countries, and supporting them in a very interesting and very exciting process of change.
For sure, there's so much there to unpack, and these are not small, trivial things. They're big changes in the way that the UN could potentially function, and partners could potentially function as well. So no, this is really, really interesting to unpack, and I'm really curious to take this forward too after this session as well. Juan or Mireia, did you want to come in on this topic of efficiency and effectiveness with behavioral science and better use of AI?
Maybe Juan.
Oh,
I think so two or three things. First, I think that particularly like Adriana mentioned, like anytime that you have a huge amount of text, and behavioral science is mainly that our interpretation of human behavior and our ways that we communicate through human behavior, different to many other parts of research, is mainly through a lot of text, correct? So that's how humans work in many ways. And until very recently, I would say until 2 years ago, it was difficult to use that information as data that you can use research from. Thanks to large language models, that's changing. So the fact that we can now interpret a lot of that information, a lot of the human knowledge, basically, that is stored in documents, is significantly changing the way we work and make it more efficient. So that I would say that's an area that I think still early, It still has issues, and we need to be understanding that those large language models are not perfect in many ways. They still suffer from some areas of problems, including hallucinations, including areas where we don't have enough context. But still, even then, it's a new tool. As a new tool, we need to learn the way to use it. We need to learn the limitations, but clearly open up a lot of things that we couldn't do before, particularly related to converting a lot of that knowledge into a lot of that data into knowledge.
Great, thank you for that one. There's so much there to unpack. The UN has things, it has data, and it has lots of text and documents. There's lots there that we could definitely unpack. Okay, so next over to Mireia. Over to you. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, no, and listen, we are a country team that still executes relatively large programs. It's about $450 to $500 million a year. We have been nominated to be a country with a common back office. So we're going to be pulling our service provision precisely to accelerate the efficiency agenda. But we're also very much hit by some of the cuts that are coming our way from a number of donors. So this idea of really doing things differently and focusing on transformation, I think it's very dear. And what we've been doing in terms of the areas of the UN 2.0, I think in general are relatively entrepreneurial and often tentative. But I was thinking for today, kind of putting together what we've done in the last 12 months. And, you know, we hosted, the government hosted, but we were very much behind the World Data Forum. And that was an opportunity to really think through what we're doing on data as a country team. And we put together, which I think was a pretty amazing pavilion where we showed both the panels, the geovisors, the virtual reality that we use, but also the technology that the agencies are deploying for teledetection, for citizen-generated work, for digital mapping, very exciting things that we had never pulled together. Also this year, we produced our 2024 UNCT Colombia Annual Results Report. My office didn't ask any of the 26 agencies to produce one single word for it. We did it using their social media posts, their reports, the evaluations, and we obviously sprinkled a bit of AI. So a massive change in the effort that we have been putting together over the last 5 years. We are rolling out very soon an inclusive digital facility. This is part of the support we've got from the Joint SDG Fund to really make sure that the connectivity investments, the infrastructure investments that government and private sector are deploying to very remote parts of the country that had not been connected really translate in inclusion outcomes. So it's a very interesting line of work. We're working with fintech ecosystem and with the informal world of microenterprises. Also this year, we were able to send our teams with in initiative with UN Pulse to Finland to present the work we've done. We had 3 prototyping laboratories in subnational parts of the country. This is a very important aspect of the Nexus effort we do, where we bring together humanitarian and development work. And it's part of a larger effort around really working at the subnational level. And I have to say, we have 3 innovation laboratories in Colombia in our UNCT, the WFP, UNFPA, and UNDPs. They had never worked together. So we're also trying to pull much better those specialist capacities that we have. We used drones in December after the floods in the Chocó department. This is part of the recovery and the work that Kamal was mentioning. And last year, we started an exercise to produce futures on development cooperation in Colombia. And imagine, in January, we're hit with the cuts. We are one of the countries in the region with the larger cuts from the US government. And as I said, those are compounded by other governments also cutting. So having this process of foresight ongoing has been a key element in the Development Partners Forum that I co-preside, that I co-chair. And it's going to give us a lot very recent and useful information to really reassess, what do we do as development cooperation. And finally, this was literally last week, I participated in some of the internal discussions of one of the agencies, happened to be UNICEF, which is really rethinking its entire business model as part of the start of the new country program. So really introducing social innovation dimensions, impact investment tools. So I think it's a a very exciting line. And my point is, we're doing all that with a toothpick, we're doing that with very limited means. So if you are able to put your weight and put, behind 130 resident coordinator offices, I think you can only imagine what we'll be able to do. So that's, again, the invitation to think of our structures as a place that can really accelerate the kind of change that UN 2.0 is looking to.
Hey, thank you for those examples, Mireia. There's so much there to unpack again. It's just in terms of how we can take this forward and the importance of it and really the future of the UN. The Secretary General calls it, this is important for the UN to be nimble and effective and deliver on his ambitious agenda. And this is really exactly what you're illustrating there. It's how the country office has been able to think about that. All right. Okay. So I think we're just getting started with the conversation here. I could have kept going, but we're reaching up to time. I'm just going to share a few remarks for the colleagues who might be interested in joining the behavioral science group. So I might ask colleagues to turn their cameras off while I just conclude with a few remarks here. Thank you so much for joining us. So as I mentioned at the start of the session, thank you. I lead the UN Behavioral Science Group, which is an initiative of the UN Innovation Network, as well as the Secretary General's office. So UN Behavioral Science Group is hosting Behavioral Science Week this year. We're bringing together 46 UN entities over the course of the week. So if you're interested in joining the group, I encourage you to do so. I'll put the link in the chat now. So essentially the group brings together over 7,000 members from more than 70 UN entities and 150 countries. So there's lots there to unpack and explore together. Okay, let me just put this in the chat for you. So there's the behavioral science group, if you haven't joined it already. And then so when it comes to what the work of the Behavioral Science Group actually does, so we do everything from running projects. We have a fellowship program that brings behavioral scientists into the UN through to publishing key reports. So I can share those with you now in the chat if you want to know more about some of the key resources. There's a guidance note from Secretary General. There's also the UN Behavioral Science Review if you want to check out some case studies and a guide we've developed. So lots more there to unpack. And then a few things that are new sort of this year is we'll be hosting some capacity building for UN colleagues who want to know more about behavioral science and gain kind of a more foundational understanding. So the week will give you a flavor of what's happening across the UN with respect to different case studies and projects. But if you want to know more about behavioral science and the methods that we use and how we do it from more of an intro perspective, and you are in the UN, apologies, just for UN colleagues as of now, you can sign up using this link here, and we'll be hosting those over the next few months to know more about behavioral science. And then finally, if you're from the UN, a UN entity, or from a member state, a government, or any other partner, and you want to know more about our work or engage with us, particularly we're looking to engage with UN entities and member states who are interested in embedding behavioral science into their work, so going beyond pilots and projects into more. You can send us an email here, and that's a way to get in touch with us. And then finally, to think about the week over the course of the next there's another session happening after this, but then also over the course of the next 4 days. Join us for Behavioral Science Week. As I said, there are 46 entities. There are still 12 more events to go, ranging from topics like picking up this conversation around behavioral science, AI, and tech, through to how do we make better decisions with behavioral science, which was also part of our conversation today, as well as reflecting on how to embed behavioral science into the work that we do in the UN. So encourage you to check out the week if you haven't done so already. And with that, thank you very much to all of our speakers for joining us today. I apologize, a bit of a rocky start with getting us going starting the session today, but hopefully this was a good way to introduce you to behavioral science and what's to come during the week, and looking forward to seeing you at sessions shortly. So with that, thanks so much, everyone. Bye for now.